So a couple of days ago, Elizabeth Warren did a environmental justice town hall with Amy Goodman from Democracy Now! And I have to tell you, she did not do herself any favor on the issue of climate change. If I had to sum up her performance, I would say that it was basically the same neoliberal claptrap that we've been getting from the Democratic Party on the issue of climate change for decades. They have this forum dedicated to climate activists who have dedicated their lives to this issue. And instead of going into detail about the specific plans you have to address this existential crisis that we're facing, Elizabeth Warren talks about how bad climate change is, how it's going to affect every living thing on this planet, like we don't already know that. Then she does this tap dance of, oh, I'm not going to give you my specific plans because I don't have any, but instead I'm going to repeat over and over and over again how when I'm in the White House, how important it is for me to actually talk to people in these communities that are being affected by climate change and pollution. And, bring them to the table so that we can form a solution that is focused on helping the most vulnerable. And if I'm being honest, this climate change town hall exposed that Elizabeth Warren really has a lack of knowledge on this issue of climate change and environmental justice and reckless pollution from corporations. Because like I said, the overwhelming majority of her time was spent not talking about specifics of the plans that she has in mind to address the climate crisis that we're in. It was just vagaries and we need to get to the table and have a conversation about this, and climate change is a real threat to our way of life, and all of this stuff that is basic elementary discourse on the issue of climate change. But there were some really interesting questions and revealing answers that Elizabeth Warren gave. Some of the topics that I'm going to talk about here. Elizabeth Warren was asked about what her plans are to address air pollution in this country that's making people sick. Terrible answer. She was asked if she would declare a state of climate emergency on day one. She gave her typical shifty, non-committal, lawyerly answers to that question. She was asked about the Dakota Access Pipeline and whether it should be shut down. I have some more to say about that. This one, when I heard her answer to this question, this was actually what set me off, and this was what made me say, you know what, fuck it, I have to do a video about this. Elizabeth Warren was asked what her boldest idea to combat climate change was, and it was a horrible answer. And one very last point I want to make before I start breaking down Elizabeth Warren's answers to these questions. Forums like this, where candidates are forced to talk about one specific issue for a long period of time, really do show you or give you a better picture of who that candidate is and what they actually believe. Because unlike the debates where you have 60 seconds to answer on a topic and that's it, when you're doing these long form discussions and forums like this, it's hard to only stick to the poll tested and poll approved talking points that you and your staff came up with, because now you actually have to get into the nitty gritty and into the details and into exactly specifically what you're going to do as president. And again, the talking points aren't going to save you for 40 minutes. You cannot use talking points for 40 minutes. And if you do, it shows your lack of knowledge and it shows your lack of dedication on the issue. And I believe that's exactly what happened to Elizabeth Warren. We all know for her entire career, she's been MIA on the issue of climate change, so clearly it's not a priority for her. But now on this, that she's running in the Democratic primary, she can't ignore the issue. So she has to at least pay lip service. So when she talks about it, it's usually in these very short, concise, pre-approved talking points from her staff. Well, you can't keep doing that in a 40-minute discussion with Amy Goodman. So let's get into some of these questions. All right, so let's go to this first question. Elizabeth Warren was asked what she would do about air pollution that's making poor people, specifically poor kids, sick. This is her answer, quote, well, let's start by not having a coal lobbyist as head of the EPA, and quote, we should have the CDC look into it. All right, so let me get to the first part of the answer about, okay, so it's basically she's trying to take a jab at the Trump administration. Oh, Trump's so corrupt. he hired a coal lobbyist to be head of the EPA. Yeah, I think we should talk about that. I think that's insanely corrupt, and I think it's insanely gross, especially while we're in the middle of a climate crisis caused by these fossil fuel companies. To have someone run the agency most responsible for addressing the climate crisis. Yes, I think that's insane. I think that's reckless, and I think that's insanely corrupt. So I partially understand and can give her issue, and I think it does need to be discussed. But on the other hand, this was a specific question about what you are going to do to address air pollution that is killing people in this country. You want to be president of the United States, so when you walk into office, it is on you to address that specific problem. When you get into the White House, nobody wants to hear about, I didn't pick a coal lobbyist to be the head of the EPA like Donald Trump. Nobody gives a fuck about that. We want to know what you're going to do. We want to know what you're going to do to address the air pollution that's killing children, that's killing people in poor communities across the country. And she had no answer to that. She had no answer to that. And it's even more clear when you look at the second part of her answer, quote, we should have the CDC look into it. And this is a common theme that you're going to find in throughout this forum. And I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but I hope everybody in my audience would go and watch this environmental justice forum that Amy Goodman hosted. But this is a common theme with Elizabeth Warren. And this is why I said earlier, most of this was just the same neoliberal claptrap that we've been getting for the last couple of decades. Let's have the CDC look into it. Have the CDC look into what? We already know that air pollution is killing a bunch of people in poor communities. We already know about the rising cancer rates and respiratory diseases and asthma. We already know that's happening. We already know where it's happening. The CDC has put out multiple reports on that, as well as other agencies and other independent organizations. So what do you mean? Let's have the CDC look into it. I'll tell you what she means. She means, let's do the runaround. Let's set up a panel to look into this issue. I'm either not willing to or have no intention of actually doing anything about this problem that I was just asked about. So I'll say we'll set up a panel, get some scientists together, we'll talk about it. They'll say, here's the real problem. And then we'll set up another panel and we'll figure out which agencies in the government would be best equipped to handle this problem that the first panel found. And then after we figure out which agencies are best to handle this issue, we'll set up another panel and then we'll see what those agencies can do to address this issue of air pollution that's killing people in poor communities. All of this is just a runaround, and then what do you know? It's the end of her first term, and all we did to address air pollution is set up a couple panels and talk about the issue, even though we already know what's happening, even though we already know that people are dying from air pollution. I'm particularly offended when I hear Democrats talk about, oh, we should have a panel and we should, bring people together and talk and, hear their problems out. And we need to listen to the people who are most affected by these issues. Let me tell you why I'm offended by that. Because in the DNC emails that WikiLeaks published back in 2016, there were a chain of emails. I can't remember if it was to the entire leadership of the Democratic Party or if it was just something circulating within the Clinton campaign. I'm pretty sure it was something that was sent about through the leadership of the entire Democratic Party. So Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, leadership in the House, leadership in the Senate. In that email, it was basically giving them a how-to guide of how to ignore Black activists and people like Black Lives Matter when they come to politicians in the Democratic Party with their legitimate concerns. It gave them a guide of how to pretend like you're actually listening to them, but without actually offering any solutions. And in that email was somebody saying, yeah, you should have these forums, bring them all together, listen, hear their concerns, talk to them, but don't promise them any real policy solutions. So basically, gaslight the Black activists who are concerned about police brutality, who are concerned about wealth inequality, the racial wealth inequality, or the racial wealth gap. Gaslight them, pretend like you're on their side, but don't offer them any real solutions because we don't actually want to do anything to fix the problem. That was exposed. The Democratic Party's strategy of how to gaslight activists was exposed. So now, when I hear politicians in the Democratic Party talk about, oh yeah, we need to get everybody together, we need to get everybody to the table, we need to hear the concerns of people who are affected by these issues. When I hear that, and I don't hear any real policy solutions, that means, to me, that person and that Democratic politician, they got that email. They took notes from that email, and they're practicing the gaslighting techniques of how to bullshit activists that they learned from the corrupt Democratic Party. And that gets under my skin, and Elizabeth Warren had that on full display during this entire town hall. This was a terrible answer. When asked if she would declare a state of climate emergency on day one, she gave her typical tap dance of an answer. We could, really. Are you going to, or are you not going to? Which one is it? Are you going to do it on the first day? Do you plan on doing it sometime after that? Because you have a lot of other stuff to do on the first day. Just answer the question. No. Quote, we could. Vague as all hell and non-committal as usual. And then she does another trick that she's known for, which is pivot to answer a question that she wasn't even asked. So she went on to say, I'll create a position in the White House to focus on environmental justice. And in the first 100 days, I'll bring in people directly affected in these communities to the table to, quote, start putting together an action plan. Just like I said before when I was covering her last answer, it's all these, let's get people together, let's get everybody to the table, and we'll talking about this issue. And then after that, after a few months of this panel, we'll convene another panel to talk about what we just talked about in that other panel and how we're going to address the issues that we found in that other panel. Like, Liz, you're running to be president of the United States. This type of dodge from Democrats on the issue of climate change and on other issues too, it really irks me because there's this fake concern, like they actually care about the input of people in these communities, and like as if they're going to take policy suggestions from these people in these communities. But in actuality, all it is a dodge so that you don't have to commit to a serious, detailed policy plan that you came up with, that you and your staff came up with to address issues that we already know exist. We already know that by 2050, hundreds of coastal cities will be underwater. So what? You mean to tell me within the first 100 days of you being in the White House, instead of actually coming out with specific policy plans to address the fact that we know if we continue on this course, millions of people are going to have to flee their homes, flee their cities, flee their towns because they're going to be underwater. Instead of you committing to a specific policy plan to address that, you're going to talk about for 100 days, you're going to bring together people in coastal communities and be like, hey, your homes are going to be underwater. What do you think about that? I'm not saying the input from people in these communities isn't important, but at the end of the day, the problem's the same and the solution's going to be the same. We already know what the problem is. So why don't you just at least put out a plan that you think would work best to address the problem. And then you could say, before we pass this, yeah, I'm going to have people in these communities come together and talk to me, see what they like about the plan, see what they don't like about the plan, see what we need to take out, see what we need to add. But no, she doesn't have a plan because it is not a priority for her. Now, the next question. Oh, this one's a doozy. So I believe it was Amy Goodman. She asked, should the Dakota Access Pipeline be shut down since it was built illegally without an environmental impact study? Elizabeth Warren, as usual, with 200 unnecessary extra words, and in a roundabout way, basically says, yeah, we should follow the laws and something, dabble. And then Amy Goodman pressed her and like, so do you want to shut down the Dakota Access Pipeline? She said yes. Also, on the Dakota Access Pipeline, I don't believe you. I don't believe you're going to shut down the Dakota Access Pipeline if you're president of the United States. And you know why? Because anybody who has the position of we should shut it down, the next administration should shut it down, they had that position when it was being built. They had that position that this was illegal, that this was violating the agreements that the United States had with tribal lands, with native tribes, this is illegal because it's violating our own laws about having to conduct an environmental impact study before any new pipeline or any project like this begins. We were saying it needs to be shut down because they were stealing land that does not belong to them. Energy Transfer Partner, they were stealing land that does not belong to them, and they were brutalizing the protesters who had the audacity to call them out. And they were basically paying the local and state police in North Dakota, to work as their private security and thugs. So everybody who has a position that we should shut down the pipeline, they were against it from the beginning. But Elizabeth Warren does not fit in that category because, like we all remember, when this was all going down, she was silent. Hush tones. Nothing to say about it. She let the brutalization of these protesters and these water protectors go on and these native people go on for months. She didn't say a goddamn word about it. She didn't say a word about it. And one of the most important fights that environmentalists have had and native people have had in recent years, Elizabeth Warren had not a word to say about it. Only time she mentioned it, she put out a mealy-mouthed, weak-sauce statement. And that was the day after Barack Obama went out and put his mealy-mouthed, pussyfooting statement out about the Dakota Access Pipeline, after it was getting an enormous amount of press in the United States and around the world. That was the only time she mentioned the Dakota Access Pipeline. That's the only time she said anything about it. And even then, it was, like I said, it was weak sauce. It wasn't, we need to shut this shit down. We need to have, I'm demanding, as the Senator of the United States, I'm demanding that the FBI and the Department of Justice look into the behavior of Energy Transfer Partners and the North Dakota government, because they're violating people's First Amendment rights, and they're also stealing native land, and they're also violating federal law by building this pipeline without an environmental impact study. Where was that? None of that. All that she had to say was, man, I think we should all get along, and I don't think we should all demonize these workers for Energy Transfer Partners. They're just, trying to get a paycheck to help their families. But also, I think we need to be nice to the protesters, and we need to find a way to hold hands and sing Kumbaya and get along. That was her response to the travesty, the outrageous building of the Dakota Access Pipeline back in 2017. And now we're supposed to believe that Elizabeth Warren, should she be in the White House, she's going to shut it down. She's going to shut that shit down because they did not have an environmental study. Come on, Liz. I don't believe you. And I feel sorry for anybody who does believe that shit. But in that answer, she said something that was concerning to me. She said on federal land that's adjacent to tribal lands, she, quote, won't approve any new pipelines without the consent of tribal leaders. Hold up. Excuse me? We're in the middle of a climate crisis, an existential threat to all life on this planet, like you've talked about over and over again in this panel and other times when you're asked about it. This crisis has been brought about largely by fossil fuel companies, like the oil companies, and their reckless pollution. Why on earth, under any circumstances, would you approve any new pipelines on federal land or anywhere in the United States? But as you see right there, she puts her typical legalese shifty spin on it, and instead of just coming out and saying, yeah, I'm going to be approving new pipelines, she tries to couch it as, only if the tribal leaders, if they say they're cool with it, yeah, of course, why not all approve a pipeline? This is, yet again, Elizabeth Warren trying to get off on a technicality. She's always trying to leave herself wiggle room to fuck over progressives if she ever gets into the White House. Because then when she's in the White House and approving new oil pipelines, she'll say, hey man, I told you if the tribal leaders said they wanted it, then why not? They're cool with it, so I'm cool with it too. Let's drill for some oil, baby. But for real, that answer saying that if the tribal leaders say it's okay, then I'll be okay with the new approving a new oil pipeline. That again goes to show you she does not understand the gravity of the situation. She does not understand the drastic, radical change we need in our country, in our politics, and in our economic system, where we no longer allow these pipelines to be built. We need to be moving in the opposite direction. approving no new oil pipelines is baseline. That's basic. That's elementary stuff. We need to be moving. You need to be talking about how you're going to shut down these other oil pipelines on federally protected land. That's the conversation we need to be having. But again, Elizabeth Warren, climate change is not a priority for her. This is not a main issue for her. Whatever happens apparently for Elizabeth Warren. Now this one really pissed me off. Directly after that last question she had about DAPL, where she gave that shitty answer, she was asked by the other moderator, what would you do as president of the United States to better protect our federal lands? She says, quote, on day one, no new drilling, no new mining on federal lands, and no offshore drilling. Hold up. You just said, not even a minute ago, you just said on federal land adjacent to tribal lands, if the tribal leaders tell me they're okay with it, I'll approve new oil pipelines. You just said it not even a minute ago. So this is Donald Trump level lying and being disingenuous, as if you didn't just say the opposite thing less than a minute before. And this is another reason why I can't stand Elizabeth Warren. She will say whatever, whenever, as long as it's politically convenient, as long as it will get her through that very moment. She'll say whatever it takes. She'll lie through her fucking teeth, just like Donald Trump. And another thing that this points to, she has no convictions. And whenever she feels like it, she'll adopt the left-wing position to get a round of applause and to avoid criticism. But she never addresses her previous contradictory positions. In this case, she just said she would approve new oil pipelines given specific conditions. Now, she's just saying, yeah, I wouldn't approve oil pipelines. There's no reconciling those two opposite positions. There's no attempt to rationalize why her position seemed different. None of that. And you see this with her on other issues too. Medicare for all. There is no reckoning with Elizabeth Warren. There's no reckoning with the fact that she was clearly on the record against Medicare for all and single payer just a couple years ago. There's a video of her after she won her first Senate election in 2013. She's interviewing with a reporter, and he asked her whether or not she supports single payer, or he must have inferred it or something. And she was like, oh, no. You need to go back and look at the tapes. I never said I supported single payer. That was back in 2013. Now in 2019, half the time she's on the campaign trail, and definitely when she's on the debate stage, she's going to go out and say, oh yeah, I support Medicare for all. I love Medicare for all. I'm with Bernie on Medicare for all. We need it. That's the obvious solution to our healthcare crisis. She'll say all of that now because Bernie Sanders made Medicare for all and single payer an overwhelmingly popular position in the United States. So now it's politically convenient and it's safe for her to say, yeah, I'm with it. But Liz, can you reconcile with me how you've changed your position in such short time from being against Medicare for all, or at the very least in 2016 you were indifferent to Medicare for all, because when Bernie Sanders was running on that was his main part of his campaign. One of the main parts of his campaign was getting Medicare for all single payer passed in the United States. If you actually cared about that issue, you would have supported him, especially since he had a real chance of winning the nomination. But you didn't. So at the very least, in 2013, you were against single payer. 2016, you were indifferent on the idea. And now we're supposed to believe you this flaming firebrand lefty who's going to fight tooth and nail to get it passed if you're president of the United States. I don't believe that. You have not convinced me of that. And ending the wars. Now, I've heard Elizabeth Warren a couple of times say, yeah, we need to end these endless wars. We need to get out of Iraq. We need to get out of Afghanistan. But Liz, you've been voting on these endless, on these absurd, insane military budgets. It's $500 billion, $600 billion, $700 billion, $800 billion to fund these endless wars for your entire career. For your entire career, you've provided no pushback to the military-industrial complex and the war machine about these endless wars. But now that you're running on the campaign trail and ending wars is a popular position, you're going to tell me that, oh yeah, we need to get out of Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm supposed to believe you. Liz, convince me that you've actually changed your position. Convince me you actually changed your mind. Tell me, walk me through the process of when you woke up and said, God damn, this whole thing is corrupt. We're massacring civilians overseas. We're doing it for profit. We're lying and starting illegal wars around the world. We need to stop this now. When was that? When was that moment for you, Liz? You can't tell me when that happened, and I don't believe, because you can't tell me when that happened, I don't believe you're actually going to end these wars. And any issue you can think of, Elizabeth Warren is just willing to take the exact opposite position when it's convenient for her. That's something that she has in common with Hillary Clinton, and that's also something she has in common with Donald Trump. Speak out of both sides of your mouth. Contradict yourself just to get through the moment, just to get a round of applause, and just to avoid criticism from the left. She's a grandstander. She doesn't mean the things that she's saying. She's at this environmental justice forum. She's just repeating talking points and using neoliberal claptrap and being vague and non-committal while paying lip service to such an important issue because she's a grandstander. Because she'll put on a show for the cameras. But to anyone paying attention, it's incredibly clear she has no backbone, she has no spine, and she's not willing to do what it takes to bring about the radical revolutionary, like she describes, big structural change that we need in the United States. Oh, this question. This says everything. This question here says everything. Elizabeth Warren was asked what her boldest idea to combat climate change is going to be. This is a quote from her. I want to spend $1 trillion. Elizabeth Warren's biggest, boldest idea to address the biggest threat to life on this planet is spend $1 trillion. Spend $1 trillion. How much we spend in Iraq? $7 trillion. How much we spend in Afghanistan? About maybe $5 trillion. Elizabeth Warren's, by the way, those were illegal wars of choice that we did for profit of U.S. corporations in the military industrial complex. And Elizabeth, we spent $13 trillion, and those are just two countries that we're in war with. There are many other countries where we're spending many hundreds of billions of dollars more. But Elizabeth Warren's big old structural change, her big idea to address the biggest threat on this planet, she's going to spend $1 trillion. Like, come on. This is what I'm talking about. She's not serious about climate change. I don't know how any lefty, anybody who is actually serious about the reports that we've been getting from international scientists, from scientists around the world, and the UN and government agencies that say if we do not get to zero carbon emissions in the next 10, 12 years, it is over. We are fucked. Anybody who believes those things, I don't know how you can take Elizabeth Warren serious on this issue of climate change. She says her boldest idea is to spend $1 trillion. You know what Bernie Sanders' boldest idea? This isn't even his, I don't know, I won't even try to classify this as his boldest idea, but it's a pretty goddamn bold idea. Bernie Sanders is going to nationalize the entire energy industry in the United States. That's bold. That's revolutionary. That's a step that nobody's talking about. And that is something necessary to turn things around and to get us to net zero carbon emissions. Bernie Sanders is going to nationalize the energy industry, which will lower costs for everyone in the United States. And more than that, what the government, the profit the government makes from energy sales in the United States from selling clean energy, they're going to take that and reinvest that back to fighting the climate crisis, back to funding environmental justice in the United States. That's a big, bold idea. And Elizabeth Warren, I'll spend $1 trillion. Spend $1 trillion on what, Liz? And that's another thing, not specific at all. I'll spend $1 trillion. Spend $1 trillion what? Subsidizing oil companies and energy companies to address the climate crisis? You're gonna spend some of that $1 trillion on tax cuts and other incentives for companies so that they could pollute less? Is that your big, bold idea on climate change, just to spend $1 trillion? And this gets to another point, that in this instance, Elizabeth Warren is acting as what the right wing likes to caricature the left as. They pretend like the way we deal with issues is just to throw more money at it. Just put more money into the program and it solves all the issues. When asked, what is your big, bold idea on climate change? All she has to say, we're going to spend $1 trillion. Not even, we're going to spend $1 trillion, we're going to spend it here, 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 and here. Just, we're going to spend $1 trillion. Bernie Sanders' plan is to spend $16 trillion on the climate crisis. And he has all these detailed programs and plans that he wants to fund, and he wants to upgrade all homes and buildings in the United States so that they run on, instead of running on power plants fueled by fossil fuels, he wants them to run on clean and renewable energy. That's how he's going to spend part of his $16 trillion. He's going to actually fund environmental justice in the United States. And he has specific plans on how he's going to, in some cases, relocate people in coastal cities so that when the sea levels rise, they can afford a new place to live. Part of that $16 trillion that Bernie's going to spend is going to go to as a form of reparations to Native American people who have been fucked over by this environmental crisis that we're in, fucked over by the pollution and fucked over by energy companies stealing their land to build oil pipelines and all these other things. Bernie Sanders has money allocated to that. So the point I'm trying to make is, if you ask Bernie Sanders, what's your big idea, what's your boldest idea to address climate change, he's not just going to say, I'm going to spend $16 trillion. And if he does say that, he's going to follow up with how he's going to spend the $16 trillion because he cares about this issue, because he's dedicated his life to this issue, because for decades, he's done the research. He's not going to, in his first 100 days, he doesn't have to convene a panel of people in these communities to talking about this issue and talk about maybe possible solutions to address the climate crisis. He's been doing that for decades. He knows the issues, he knows the problems, and him and his team knows how to solve the problems. And he's very specific about it. That is not Elizabeth Warren. And let me finish here. We're talking about the extinction of human life on this planet and possibly all life on this planet. Anybody who is still entertaining the thought that Elizabeth Warren would be some lefty savior if she was ever president of the United States needs to get that out of their head, and they need to stop misinforming people. On the climate crisis alone, Elizabeth Warren, status quo. There is no big structural change. It's more of the same. More subsidies and more subsidies and tax cuts to these giant polluters, and begging them, praying, oh please, can you not kill us all with your reckless pollution? That's Elizabeth Warren's plan. Elizabeth Warren's plan isn't to nationalize the energy industry. It's just tax cuts and hopefully more regulation on the industry. Look, man, she's not Donald Trump, sure, but she's not anywhere near what we need to address this climate crisis.